Leading with Culture is brought to you by Maslow Leadership. Visit maslowleadership.com.
Welcome to Leading with Culture's 8th episode. This is Timothy Tiryaki, founder of Maslow Leadership. This is the last episode of this season, and we wanted to create a special episode for you. So we have a little surprise. We invited over our production partners, the Biz Dojo team, to interview me. We had a chance to review the great learnings and insights from previous episodes, while also exploring my story of starting Maslow Leadership. Once more, a warm welcome to Leading with Culture.
Welcome, everyone, to a special edition of the Biz Dojo and the Leading with Culture podcast. I want to start off by saying this feels like I've been thinking about it all morning. The Flintstones Meet the Jetsons, that great crossover film. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's one of my favorite childhood movies. And so that's what we're doing today. We're getting together with our friend Tim. You've got Seth and JP, and we're going to talk about all kinds of amazing things, including, what we've all learned from starting podcasts, working together, as well as some big ideas with leading with culture. But maybe, Tim, if I can intro you and give you the floor and let people know what we're up to today.
Well, thank you so much, Seth and JP. I was looking forward to this episode as a season finale on the Leading with Culture podcast season 1. And on your end, let's see how you folks also share with this as well. But I was looking forward to this conversation. This is more of a reflective, recollective episode, maybe looking back at the other 7 episodes we did together in the 8th episode, and also the great work that you folks have done for powering and helping us produce Leading with Culture. So we'll talk about the ideas of the podcast, what I learned through the podcast, and also some of the big ideas that I heard from our speakers, our wonderful guest speakers that have inspired us, and look forward to a usual great conversation, the Biz Dojo style. So over to you, JP.
We've known each other for a little while now. We had the opportunity to actually go through Module 1 and Module 2 and expand our leadership capabilities and learn more about coaching. So for those who don't know us, Seth Anderson, who opened the episode, and myself, JP Gaston, we have a little podcast called the Biz Dojo. We met with Tim, and we had some great coaching from Tim and his team. And then we started talking about putting together a podcast for some great ideas that Tim has really started to share around leading with culture and that whole concept, which I like. For me, it's pretty incredible. Like it's taking a Maslowian? It's Maslowian, right? A Maslowian theory and expanding on something that's like been in place for a long time. And I don't think a lot of people have stepped up to do any expansion on. So I guess first off, for me, my first question would be, where did that idea come from? Like what actually sparked that in you to say, hey, this whole concept actually can be pulled over into the culture of an organization?
Well, that's a great starting point, JP, and taking a step back on the story. And I'm not going to go back to how humanity started. I need to be mindful of that. If you let me know, I love speaking, but just...
That's a long podcast.
Right? Exactly. Well, my third book that was nationally published in Turkish was called Humanity 2.0. And when I was talking about that, writing that book 15 years ago, I was talking about how we need to change and evolve as human beings, and especially looking from a leadership organizational perspective, why if we don't change and kind of foreseeing how things will get worse, and before this environmental crisis was even spoken out there. So this need to evolve capitalism to more extent triple bottom line and expanding our understanding of value, how leadership needs to change. And I remember finding this visual on the internet. You might have seen it. There's a triangle which puts on top of it egological, like the man on top and all creatures and beasts and everything below, versus a circular one next to it. The circle said ecological, circular, and all like beings, creatures on earth together in a circle and environment. I put that in that 15 years ago. And as I was doing my PhD here on the West Coast and getting ready to launch Maslow, I started to get into more and more Maslow's work. I was studying humanistic psychology as roots of positive psychology, positive organizational behavior. And interestingly, like Maslow just like called me in a way. And the more I started getting into the details, I started reading his unpublished manuscripts, his journal, and his way of thinking. And one of the things I found, which I love talking about, that Maslow actually himself, he never envisioned his theory of motivation and needs in that pyramid, the triangle. He never put in the triangle himself. And then when I found the origins, it was another organizational psychologist. I was mesmerized, and I started thinking, how would I re-envision the hierarchy of needs in the post-COVID era? And of course, I came to the concentric circles. And then when I noticed the Maslow name also symbolically had that triangle and that circle, the A and the O, and I was like, wow, there's some weird symbolic stuff happening here. Of course, I think it was just, it was great to connect the dots in that way. But the more I started reading about Maslow and see his vision in his last 10, 20 years, he started seeing the workplace, organizational dynamics, enterprise as the source of transformation for humanity. And in some of his writings, he acknowledged we cannot just work on human beings like one by one through therapy. And I admit, I think many of us need wonderful forms of therapy, but he said there's a role of organizations and leaders to help human beings actualize their potential, the collective actualization of humanity, of teams and individuals. There's something that we need to work on there together. And there were even some hints of culture, the importance of culture coming into that. So that was kind of some of the points I picked, and I felt this sense of connection with my purpose and mission of humanizing leadership and organizations. And then that kind of turned into a purpose. Like, I would love to continue Maslow's work. We're not just bringing the same work, but we're building on that, but we're bring that into the research in 21st century. What would it look like? The human needs in the workplace in 21st century. So kind of built on that and came to here.
Here being the Leading with Culture podcast, fast forward a little bit. When did you know that was something that you wanted to pursue? And I guess my second question, I'm going to do a little question stacking, is what does leading with culture mean to you in terms of a phrase? Like what's the layer beneath that?
Yeah, so I'll start with leading with culture, and that term started to get clear to me in the last year, honestly. Like, I haven't been thinking about that for years, but culture, like my work is at the intersection of, or our work is leadership, culture, and coaching, as you know. But the idea that as in the last year, noticing how the leader's role is changing, and this shift from, I don't think it's complete, I don't think it's mainstream yet, but still this shift from managing products and services to moving towards managing people, culture, and technology. Like, if I can bring the right people together, build the right team culture, enable them to use the technologies the company has, and then they will figure out the products and services. So there was this expansion of the role of the leader. And I noticed a lot of leaders we work with in corporate programs, how leaders and managers, I'm using it interchangeably here, were struggling with the new expectation of managing DEI on their plates, managing well-being, and expected to coach their people. But they're coming from a background of products and services and processes in this new realm. And that struggle of which one do I manage? And there was also a little bit of this dilemma of, do I work on results of the operations, or do I work on building the people side? So we want to reconcile. It's not an either or, it's a both and. You both work on the people side and the results side. And from that evolved this idea of leading with culture in the sense of role modeling the culture you want to see in the workplace, focusing on building a great workplace culture. And that was kind of a nice slogan, a mantra that embodied that vision, and that we built programs, coaching and training and leadership transformation programs around. And I believe the second question was, when did the idea of the podcast, was that podcast specific set?
Yeah. When did you kind of think that was a medium you wanted to explore with this?
Well, as we're in the third year of our journey as Maslow, and we want to find ways of share what we do, but also get to learn from great names out there. So how could we connect? How could we connect with the right people and create as part of our community building? And we were inspired by your work. We were inspired by the Biz Dojo podcast and the work you do, and how you got to meet wonderful people and bring great content. And we said, I want to do something similar. So I appreciate you inspiring me in doing that as well, as was through getting you to know you as you were going through our coach training program in module 1. We got to know you as leaders and coaches and podcast hosts. And I said, yeah, I would love to do that, and together with you guys. So I'm glad we had a chance to partner for doing this.
Here we are.
Here we are. Well, I don't know if we ever actually got into the story of how we've ended up finding Maslow, because that was very early on in our podcast journey where I think we were looking for a guest. It was Remembrance Day or that week. Remember that, JP? And we were trying to find someone that had a military background or something that we could kind of talk about that. And we came across a fellow by the name of Gord Aker.
Gord Aker, yes.
Yeah. So he was third or fourth guest ever in the Biz Dojo. And I remember we saw the Maslow, he talked about that a little bit. And I was just like, this is cool. Like, this really resonates with me just in what I knew about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. I could just connect the dots right away that this was a cool way to come at workplace culture. So yeah, I don't know if you knew that, but like, it was very early on in the Biz Dojo days. And that's ultimately how we ended up finding What Your Coaching program and getting involved with it. So it's kind of cool. Just like, you don't even know what you're getting into necessarily when you have a guest or you connect with these people, and sort of the ripple effect that then happens from those connections.
That's wonderful. I had totally forgotten about that. I even remember that episode. I listened to that episode towards the end. There's a shout out to Maslow and yeah, that was a great episode. And we'll send our thank yous to Gord as well. And I'm glad you reached out to him.
Well, and we certainly talked about how much we've learned in our, what are we on now? 4 seasons, Seth? 4 seasons. Wow.
4 seasons, so roughly like 100, 110 episodes with all things included. Yeah.
Yeah. We've certainly explored some big ideas, and you've got some really big ideas that are coming across on your podcast. So what are some of the connections that you've made, or some of the big ideas that you've really been inspired by or touched by in some way over the course of the season so far?
Well, what I loved observing from a variety of speakers, that's, as you know, quite seasoned speakers in different levels and different industries, there was a common theme. There was a common theme of acknowledging that organizations need to be more people focused than they are. And this acknowledgement towards, again, our purpose, which is humanizing the workplace. But there are a lot of struggles that come together with that. We got to hear about all the struggles and different aspects and facets of it. It's really complex. But there was also this dilemma about, it's not just humanizing while we're also humanizing, but there's this incredible performance and results challenge coming up as well this year. So both, again, and understanding transformation. So our listeners heard me repeat this a lot, but there's a difference of change management and transformation management. And we got to talk a lot about transformation and the different aspects of transformation. Roles, responsibilities are transforming, ways of doing business is transforming, and culture is transforming, leadership is transforming. I have to admit, it feels like a bit too much how we talk about, like, it's important to get out of your comfort zone, but it's a learning zone. But then if you step too much on the gas on too many areas, it's the burnout zone. So like, we also need to learn to step on the brake, to come back in the comfort zone, to rest and relax as part of high performance as well. But this clear shift towards the employees market, an employee driven market, and how the talent scarcity is really hitting. Now, the interesting thing is I think organizations that were more proactive in building better workplace cultures and better leadership are clearly in a better spot. And those that were kind of maybe knew about it, but didn't take fast enough actions, or a little bit lagging or following, there's serious struggles out there. And we hear it from prospects and clients that this biggest challenge these days, like summer 2022, is the retention and turnover challenge. And the interesting thing is it's going beyond just managing culture, because some organizations are acknowledging they were like too late to catch the culture train. It's better catch it whenever you can, but like, even if they start now, it's going to take a couple of years, 2, 3, 5 years to build a more people-focused organization. But they're starting that. They're acknowledging that they also need to radically re-envision their way of doing business. So they're like supply chain optimization, business model optimization, technology usage. So that's happening as well. So a lot is happening on the leadership realm, management realm. And it was really a great season to acknowledge the complexities of being a leader and everything that it brings together with it.
Yeah, and certainly a lot has been forced along over the last couple of years. There is some rapid, radical changes required in the last 2 years, especially when it comes to leadership. There's a lot of leaders that I know that were not ready to lead in a virtual environment.
Yeah, Seth, any comments on that?
Yeah, I got a couple of things going through my head. I think one of the things, and you said it a bit earlier, and I'm just kind of continuing on the vein a little bit, but the difference between manager and leader. And I think I thought I knew the difference between those things at one time, but it seems like increasingly blurred. And I'm curious, just through your conversations and the work you're doing and what you're seeing, and maybe some stuff that's come through the podcast, have the expectations of a manager changed partially due to the change in the way that the workplace functions through more work from home, partially through digitization? But do you have a sense now on like what the split is or how you differentiate between management and leadership?
Yes, this is one of those little bit of philosophical debates, and there are different points of view for sure. And I have respect and I understand. I hear the different voices truly on. Some people see leadership as a skill set, which we should encourage to cultivate at all ages. And it's independent of the seat you sit in, right? So some personal competencies of dealing with life and maybe principles and values and that self-awareness and emotional intelligence, right? It's valuable at all ages, all levels, regardless. But when you look in the organizational setting, there is also a truth that not all people managers have the same type of scope of work. And the higher you go up in an organization and the larger the organization, there is a focus on more strategy and vision, and which it's not expected at all levels. Like you don't re-envision strategy at all levels, right? So there comes a point where it's about a certain group of people and seeing the way they see it, that, I don't know, the flight tower on whose landing was taking off, they need to do some planning there, some strategy and visioning. And so that's where the differences start to shape in the last couple of decades. When we look at Maslow's work or the management literature in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was no such distinction. They just used like management as the main term of managing people, managing business, managing strategy, managing it all. But in the last 20, 30 years, I think maybe things are a bit more sophisticated or the concept evolved, hence this distinction of leadership and management. So leaders managing more strategy and inspiration, but managers also taking care of managing the business in terms of more process, operations, and running of the day-to-day. Now, is this necessary or not? Do we need that or not? Is that the right approach or not? Those are all great discussions to have. But in reality, in practice, there is that difference of managers more used from frontline team leaders, supervisors to mid-level managers, to leadership being used for more or less maybe directors and above based on the organizational size, coming out as a little bit of a difference. Now, interesting fact. So Maslow was one of the first to mention a term. He had a vision he called enlightened management. In the 60s, when he wrote about that, there was no such distinction. So he meant all people leaders or people in power, but he used the term enlightened management. And he wasn't coming from like a spiritual place necessarily, or he wasn't like just preaching, I don't know, Buddhism or Taoism or any other philosophy, but he was like, we need a different form of leadership. It's not just about managing business and operations. It's that place of actualizing and transcending and becoming more enlightened as a leader, as a manager. And that's what he started to envision. And I love that he was brave and bold enough. Just imagine today in your workplace settings that you want to talk about, like, how do we get enlightened as managers, right? It's very risky to even talk about that and bring in where he was courageous 60, 70 years ago to bring those ideas.
It's funny that's actually the question I got wrong on the Maslow quiz in the course, and it was specifically the word management that I was like, I don't think Maslow was like it. That didn't seem like a word that would have been in the vocab, but I guess I was wrong.
Well, if you didn't get that question right, it's not on you, Seth. It's on us. We'll be sure next time we clarify that even better and explain that part. So thanks for the feedback. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Leading with Culture. Many leaders are expected to manage culture, but are not equipped to lead with culture. At Maslow, we provide culture analytics, culture training, and coaching on how to lead with culture. In other words, we provide research and data-driven culture and leadership transformation. Our corporate programs include research in the design, where we measure the pre- and post-impact of our leadership and coaching programs. We have 3 pillars of our work. Number 1, culture transformation. Our research on the changing employee needs in the post-COVID era created a brand new approach called culture actualization. The employee engagement measures and systems we're currently using were designed 10 to 20 years before and are not capturing the needs of this post-COVID era. Leadership development. Leading with Culture and Leader as a Coach are our signature programs helping leaders on this next chapter. Number 3, coaching. We develop large-scale corporate coaching programs and offer ICF-accredited coach certifications. Reach out to us to get more information at maslowleadership.com.
You've talked a little bit about technology, and you're talking about, how things are evolving over time. Back in episode 3, you had a conversation with Josh Blair, and you were talking about technology and AI stepping into this realm that sort of blurs the lines of leadership between leading people or coaching versus mentoring. It's so forward thinking, I think, to consider how technology could evolve even in defining the role, not just the tools to support the role, but those tools can further define the roles. I'm just interested in your perspective from that episode in particular, because I know I sit and do the editing work and production work on it, but I probably listened to it after doing that work 3 or 4 times, just taking in some of the conversation with Josh.
Well, that was a great episode, and I appreciate talking to Josh. And I think we both know him and his great history and past, as well as being a great TELUS leader and have 25 years with TELUS and telecom, and also so he brought a lot. We talked about the future of coaching and micro coaching and coaching with AI, and just imagine this. Wouldn't it be so interesting to be able to say one day, like, "Hey Siri, hey Google, hey Alexa, I need a coaching session. Talk to me." Oh, there you go. My Google's no Google, not now. You're not there yet. But one day, what if we could have that? And it was interesting. Sometimes I think about, I've been a coach educator, leader as a coach educator for the past 10 years, and I talked to hundreds of people coaching. I could visualize in my mind the thousands of combinations, possibilities of where to go, how to go, and the sentiments, the tone, the way you use the words, your frequently used words. Actually, my mind is doing that theme analysis, cluster analysis, emotion analysis, and I wonder. I was curious sometimes. I wonder if we could pass that over to AI. Could we teach the AI to be able to do that? I don't know. Time will show. But I think we might get there. We have some time. But meanwhile, we have great ways of leveraging AI for supporting coaches, and that's what Josh talked about, their way and their platform. When you bring micro coaching to your employees through a platform, and so it's partially, you do have one-on-one sessions, but you have mostly written conversation with a coach. End of the day, you're like, "I had a horrible meeting. I don't feel good. I would love to debrief about that." And you have an opportunity to write. And as you write back and forth with your coach, it's a real coach. It's not AI. But I love how Josh positioned that AI is supporting the coaches, and AI is proposing potential venues and paths and questions and resources. But the coach gets to make the final pick on, "Here are some questions I want to ask you, and here's a resource I'd like to share with you." So I think that the optimal solution is actually how coaches and leaders as coaches learn to leverage technology that can be predictive and give them insights and actually support the leaders. Because I think in today's environment, and considering how difficult it is to be a leader, a manager, whatever we want to call it, at all levels, we need technology support. And I think AI is evolving to support leaders even on the human side, the human dynamics. And we're really curious to explore and see where that takes us.
I think I'm borderlining on buzzword at this point in my experience, but sort of humanistic leadership. And what does that mean to you? And as we look into the future, how do you see sort of the human touch evolving within culture versus AI? Because even when I just think about coaching, a lot of coaching is based on listening, which, an AI could do and, potentially could learn to play a role in that space. But, humanistic leadership, what does that kind of mean? And how do you think, what do you think that touch actually looks like in the future for the workplace?
Yeah, this is really turning into a great futuristic conversation. And I don't know, but we'll think out loud together. But what I'm curious about is seeing how AI is evolving to be able to even create art, right? There's AI that creates paintings and music. And if so it's interesting to think about, what is it that differentiates us from machines and computers and AI? I think it's important ethical considerations to have, and also those that are programming the AI on. But I think we still have some distinct advantages in terms of compassion and maybe more so called the heart-based qualities. I think the more mind, cognitive, logic processing, AI might even be ahead of us, but the gut and the heart, maybe our whole person neurologic system on our intuition and the feeling space. So that's where we have some differentiating factors. And that's where leaders need to keep developing their skill sets, and coaches and leaders as coaches, both sides. So I think coaches are kind of experts, step ahead on building those coaching skills, and coaching leaders, helping leaders also develop their coaching skills. But helping leaders to acknowledge the feeling, the emotion side, and how that works, the meaning making of emotions, feelings. That's the opportunity that we'll keep at this point and in the near future that I see. And that's where we have a role as coaches and leaders to keep building our emotional intelligence. Now, the way maybe 100 years ago, not even 100 years ago, even until 20, 30 years ago in some parts of the world, and even today probably, literacy was an issue or is an issue in some locations. So, right, just basic reading, writing. In several countries, we talk about financial literacy, right? We need to teach financial literacy to kids and young folks to be able to manage. And we would talk about also emotional literacy, the capability to read in terms of understanding what is this feel, what do I call this, and express, or reading, writing of your emotions. And there are other aspects, facets of that. So what we're cultivating and building is literacy on human needs. So we believe that in order to do true empathy, if you want to apply empathy, you need to not just understand feelings, but understand the other person's needs. And a lot of us come from a point of view where I think I know what you need and I'm showing empathy because I'm doing this. Whereas there's even this understanding of, no, those are assumed needs about the other person. I need to even ask and hear from you and help you express your needs. That's a lot what we do in Maslowian coaching and the ideas, right? To bring that literacy to be able to talk about your own needs. This is what I call it, and this is what I need, but building the courage to be able to express that and understand each other's needs. And at the source of a lot of conflict is not understanding each other's needs. And I think that, so needs is like one level before even in the feelings. So if we can talk about the needs, then we can resolve a lot of the challenge in the workplace. Being human-centered in the workplace, being humanistic means actually understanding each other's needs, talking about those needs, emotional intelligence. It's like a lot of it connects back to needs, and we want to bring that back the way like Gallup, for example, has fostered a strengths-based literature. 20, 30 years ago when that idea came out, like building on your strengths-based leadership, strengths-based cultures, and part of the positive psychology movement as well, it was breakthrough. But we want to acknowledge that living your strengths is one of your self-actualization needs, and you have other needs as well. So let's bring this richness back into the leadership and organizations realm to talk about needs and motivation. And that's what we see as part of humanizing the workplace and maybe humanistic leadership. Seth, back to your question. Wow, that was a long answer.
That was really great. Like that actually, especially in the last 100 meters of that answer, really answered or connected two dots for me, which was humanistic. It really is about understanding needs. And, those are two concepts that I'm familiar with, but the way you connected those two really like hit home for me. So thank you.
I'm glad to hear. Well, again, thinking about a lot of the language like employee experience, client experience, learning experience, user experience, all of those CX, EX, LX, the experience realm. So what are we trying to understand is a journey mapping. It's actually, what do they need? Are we meeting those needs? So I found that, and that mapping and that process, that empathetic thinking, empathetic research, like actually just bringing that language of needs has been so helpful at many different settings.
I think it works worldwide too, which is always interesting because like back in episode 2, you talked to Envar about some of the differences in cultures. And he specifically talked about the difference between taking someone out to lunch in Turkey versus in the UK, you have to actually schedule time with that person and create the space in their calendar. And I kind of laughed when he was talking about that, but that has to be, you really take the time to walk through the idea of culture when it comes to leadership, right? Like really understanding that whatever you've put together, and it fits very well into the Maslowian framework, but understanding that it needs to be something that can cross different cultures, not just in an organization, but a lot of organizations are international organizations. So being able to have a culture built for an organization that will actually touch all those different places, that certainly can't be easy. And I'm just curious about your perspective on how that's come together, even within the Maslow coaching, because I know even in the module 2 that I was a part of, there were people from different countries around the world who were a part of that training program. And so they were all coming from a different place for coaching. So just interested in your perspective there too.
Yes, well, looks like you've listened very well, JP. I appreciate that. A great question from episode 2 with Emma. Yeah, it was nice to talk about how, now again, culture has many layers, but this idea of national cultures is constantly at play in the geography that you're living. There's a country's culture, the region's culture, but then there's also the intersection of the corporate culture, the organization's culture that you're part of, and both are at interplay. Now, when you're more internally focused in that organization, you live the corporate culture, and that's what I think the global multinational corporations have achieved well, and in terms of building culture. Now, some of them have more ethical, flourishing cultures. Some do business at the expense of people and less ethical, but focusing on the great workplace cultures. Like, they've built really strong cultures to enable their people, but still they're not independent of the national cultures. When you're doing business with people, as we talked about there in UK, and your clients, your vendors, your suppliers, you deal with the national culture, the way they perceive time and money and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. But I think there's a shared point on the awareness of each other, the context and the culture, and what we're trying to cultivate on this idea of leading with culture in the programs we do and the leader as a coach training, right? It's about building that awareness of that curiosity to listen, learn, ask questions, and understand, and a lot of values of like lifelong learning, or the curiosity to learn from each other, to understand how does the culture work in that setting and the different settings. But then you start building this what's called cross-cultural awareness. And actually, when you look at some studies on some expats that travel between countries and their family dynamics, on the way they build some resilience on and understanding cross-culture dynamics, they build an ability to be more adaptive and getting along with different people, and actually become less judgmental, right? So it's like travel. Every country you travel opens your perspective with the food and the people and the culture, and you know more of. So what used to be maybe the other culture, the enemy culture, you get to know the culture, and it humanizes. But the layers of culture is interesting to consider. And I think, and of course, being a Canadian organization and based in Canada, we do have a lot of advantage here of working together with incredible people from all around the world, different races, different genders, different nationalities, different religions, and coexisting and finding ways of coexist. And we found that actually, like, the Maslow work, we believe, is flourishing in the 21st century. And here, and this is a great place where we're actually sharing back with the world on how to work across cross-cultural contexts and how leadership can transcend all of those.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Leading with Culture. I wanted to share what we do at Maslow Leadership in a minute. Many leaders are expected to manage culture, but are not equipped to lead with culture. At Maslow, we provide culture analytics, culture training, and coaching on how to lead with culture. In other words, we provide research and data-driven culture and leadership transformation. Our corporate programs include research in the design, where we measure the pre and post impact of our leadership and coaching programs. We have 3 pillars of our work. Number 1, culture transformation. Our research on the changing employee needs in the post-COVID era created a brand new approach called culture actualization. The employee engagement measures and systems we're currently using were designed 10 to 20 years before and are not capturing the needs of this post-COVID era. Leadership development. Leading with Culture and Leader as a Coach are our signature programs helping leaders on this next chapter. Number 3, coaching. We develop large-scale corporate coaching programs and offer ICF-accredited coach certifications. Reach out to us to get more information at maslowleadership.com.
So, Tim, just curious, as you've gone through the process of doing the podcast, is there anything that's come up with your guests, or as you've gone through it, that's maybe challenged your thinking or given you a fresh perspective as it relates to leading with culture and what that means in the workplace?
Did I get something that challenged my thinking? I'm not sure if it challenged my thinking, because I'm such a learner for everything. I'm at awe with everything I heard about. And for me, I'm a little bit of a synthesizer. To me, like, I always connect the dots. But seeing how, again, there are dynamics from one-on-one dynamics to leading with culture when you're just like contacting someone one-on-one on how you help them manage their career, how you have career conversations one-on-one, how we talk with Angela about a squiggly line career, or helping them with their performance management, or helping them think about who they are, helping them manage their well-being. So this one-on-one dynamics of leadership and leading with culture. And then there were the next level, the team dynamics of building the team and the team's North Star and the team's collaboration, cohesiveness. And then the system, the organization, how the organization is transforming. I think what was interesting and trying to even visualize is hard, but transformation is happening at individual level. As individuals, we're all, I believe the world is going through like an existential like challenge. And that's what I'm seeing many people. They're like, man, we might die next year if there's another like round of virus. So I'm just going to do the things I love doing. I'm not going to work for this company, or I'm not going to work for this leader. Hence this like global awareness, awakening, existential crisis. So personal transformation is happening. And then team-based transformation is happening. Who are we as a team and how do we adapt to this? And then the corporate organizational transformation is happening. So that was like mind-blowing to think about. On one side, I think like, how are we going to pull this together as humanity? And the other side, I just know that we'll be together with you folks as well on that little kid's perspective on the ocean side, throwing back the starfish back in the ocean. And this adult comes and asks, so what are you doing? And then the kid says, I'm saving the starfish. The adult looks around and says, but there are so many starfish here. How, like, what difference is this going to make? And he or she says, well, it made a difference to that starfish I just threw back in the ocean. So I know that we'll be on the side of driving change, making change, and helping leaders navigate through this crazy time and this crazy change.
One thing that popped into my mind as you were kind of going through your answer there, and probably just because I just finished the second module, and I don't know, it's kind of off topic, but I think it all fits. The paradoxical mindset is something that got brought up, I think, on day 2. And I've been thinking a lot about that, and really that concept of being open to like both sides of information. And that's like an exceedingly hard thing to do, I think, for a lot of leaders. And I'm just curious if, and I just kind of wanted to riff on that for a minute, like, what is the paradoxical mindset, and how can leaders maybe start to embrace that? Because I do think it is a really important emerging skill when you just have so much information and so much change happening. Like you really need to be open to all sides of everything. And I don't know. I think it's a skill a lot of us need to develop.
Well, that's an interesting mindset. When I got to learn about it, I felt it was like completing a holistic mindset puzzle. It was a missing puzzle piece. And most of us, we know about the growth mindset, right? So Professor Carol Dweck's book and the growth mindset, the learner's mindset, and we've heard many other mindsets. But this paradox mindset, which is there's a small literature in that area that's researching and looking into that, and it looks into how the people that can hold conflicting ideas, and in my simpler terms, to sleep through it, like, should we do this or not do this? Do we go or not go? So this idea of going, not going, just hold on to that idea, staying in that paradox. Like, do we use more technology? Do we become more technology focused or people focused? It's both and. Just stay in that paradox and those big decisions, and just staying in the paradox. There's early evidence that those people have more creative ideas. They deal with change better. But just the ability, and I know like there's a strong paradigm that we should decide fast, decide now, decide with what you have. But on the other side, I think that's part of the firefighting culture. From problems directly jump into action, problem action, versus we need some reflection. We need some dialogue, right? It's called the double loop learning. Let's not just move into action. Let's think about our assumptions. Or triple loop learning. Let's also talk about like, who are we? Where are we going towards? So deeper ways of thinking. So the paradox mindset is just sitting with it. I find it to be very actually contemplative in a way, like just stay in the question. That reminds me, if there's a meditation I like practicing, learned by Deepak Chopra, and he just asks the question that it's available on YouTube as well, but just like, who am I? And don't answer, don't seek the answer, just keep breathing, eyes closed, just like hold on to the question, like, who am I? And just breathe, just like watch thoughts coming out, and don't jump on board on any one of the trains, and just stay in the question. It's a paradox with all the facets, but that idea, and leaders face that a lot these days with so many decision making, but sometimes just sleeping through it and reflecting on it, or or just staying in the paradox, you come up with better ideas. Well, I'm going to turn the question back to you folks. So both of you, you're both leaders in a large organization, podcast hosts, but you're also coaches, and you had a chance to experience like learning or going through our programs. But tell me a little bit about your experience of bringing in leadership coaching into your portfolios.
Yeah, I'll start mostly because Seth is holding the mic away from his face right now, so I'll go first. When I came into Maslow, I've gone through a number of coaching programs over the years. I think just about every organization puts together some form of coaching, either internally or they bring an outsourced partner in to do some form of coaching. So I would say I've had bits and pieces all over the place when it comes to coaching. And when I stepped in, I wasn't exactly sure. I knew we would probably talk about the hierarchy because of the name. But honestly, it tied together all of these little bits and pieces that I've had over the years. It tied them all together with this nice stitch through each of the different concepts that I've learned. And it gave me something new and different, even just by putting all of those pieces together. And then that was module 1. And then I did a whole second module where I had the opportunity to do a little bit more exploration with others. What you were just talking about, getting a chance to really step back and sit on a question. I started doing that a lot more myself in my coaching and learning how to leave space, especially as a podcaster and someone who worked in broadcasting for a while. It's really hard for me to leave space. So that was a learning that I had. And it was a very enlightening experience to actually tie all of those things together and now have an opportunity to employ that sort of mindset when I sit down and have those conversations with people. I think I've moved a lot more away from the mentoring and the thou shalt type, I'm air quoting and people can't see it because it's a podcast, but coaching model into a true human focused coaching model where I'm really having deep, meaningful conversations with people and helping them get to the answers that they need rather than telling them what to do. So it was a great experience.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Thanks, JP. And Seth, well, you've just completed another round as well. So tell me more.
Yeah, I think I'm 48 hours removed from being in the classroom with you. So it's very fresh. For me, my entire definition of coaching has evolved and changed over, let's just call it the last 2 years. What I thought was good coaching, what I believe to be effective, performance coaching, et cetera. I've just completely rechanged my definition. And sometimes I have to remember to be kind to my previous self and be like, you were doing the best you could with what you knew. But having experienced some amazing coaching, both, through the Maslow program and with some other things that I've been pursuing, it's just creating space for people and helping them, dive into their inner wisdom is extremely effective in any vocation, life. It's just, there's a real art and technique to it. So my hat's off to anyone who has that skill set. And it's something I've really been working on developing, is just holding space for people and having the ability to just listen, hear what the person is saying and be able to pick things up. And then what's really been a game changer for me and really was driven home this week, is the structure that you and your team have built. What really stands out in my mind is the guitar strings in the background. There's the funnel. There's all kinds of tools and resources and models to work with as a coach, because no two coaching conversations are the same. But just remembering to stay in tune with yourself and the conversation, that's a really, beautiful imagery that has been very effective for me. So, the whole experience of going through the Maslow program has been life-changing in many ways, but I just, that part of the model really stands out and allows for me to check back in with myself. If, a chord seems a little bit out of tune or something, isn't quite right. It's okay, let's just get grounded, and knowing what that means for myself and how I can tune it is making all the difference as a coach and a leader. So that's how I would describe it.
I'm also doing a lot more self-coaching. I don't know if you're doing this, Seth, but as you're talking about that, I am finding that I am in the middle of something and I'm like, okay, I'm in coach mode now for JP. I am going to tell myself how to get through this thing that I'm working on.
Well, there's a great book on that. It's called Chatter, Dr. Ethan Kross. I've reached out to him a couple of times because that book is really great. And it offered up that self-coaching, and doing something as simple as saying your name to do something like you would on a sports field can be extremely effective. And I think what's been a great realization for me is, everyone, you can go anywhere and read, hey, start meditating, get up early in the morning, do this, do that, and that'll make your life better. And I agree with all those things, but they're even more effective when they have a purpose. And so now for me, like, when I know that I'm off balance or out of tune, knowing which one of those things is what I need, back to the needs piece, Tim, that we were riffing on earlier, it's so much more effective. Like, I know that meditation would help me right now, or I know that a walk or talking to someone, and that self-coaching and that self-tuning is it's a really cool place to play. And it's not something I think that I ever thought of for the first 80% of my life.
Well, I'm so happy to hear about all this experience and wonderful comments, folks. Thank you so much. In the last 6 months, like, I've learned so much through this podcast process. Now, like the interviews themselves, the content, connecting, getting together with people, but the energy it creates, like doing a podcast as a sense of sharing knowledge and putting it out there in the world. The participants brought nice energy. We were excited about each episode, and this whole experience with you folks have been incredible. We've learned so much on the behind the scenes. I have to admit, for those listening, like, if you think it's just like, you know what, I'll just record something and put out, it's not that easy. It was way more complicated than I thought, and especially because we wanted to do it something of great quality. And that's why I'm so glad we partnered with you. We would not have been able to do this without you. You built our capacity. We got to learn, and it was great to experience this doing together in a professional way, the front end and the back end, and both together. So I'm really grateful, and I look forward to, again, continuing this. I know we have a Maslow conference this fall, a virtual conference, where I look forward to inviting you folks as guest speakers to do another, maybe a crossover with Biz Dojo episode. And that will be lovely to bring together our communities and continue this learning journey. So I have a feeling, like, I think this was the longest episode ever we did. And I have a feeling that we could do this for hours and hours, the three of us.
Yeah, no, we've had to cut short many great conversations. That's one of the things. You got to kind of stick to a time limit. So it's been a pleasure, Tim, and thanks for all the work that you've helped us with. And we look forward to continuing to collaborate down the road.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tim. This has been great.
That was my pleasure. Thank you so much, JP. Thank you, Seth.